And welcome to today's stream. So, building off of where we left off last time, we're gonna go through a new plugin and come up with a new rendering that's gonna be able to combine with also the plugin that we used last time. It's a little bit different. It's called Perspective Plotter, and basically it'll take a photo, overlay that onto the camera, so you can then build a 3D world off of the camera. So we are going to be able to use some photos from my study abroad in Italy, which will inspire a certain environment that I'm designing for an upcoming project. So the idea here is, let's see how far we can get into recreating this photo in 3D within the time frame of this stream. And feel free to ask any questions at any time in the chat. Welcome back, EM. Nice to have you always. So let's get right back into it. Let's switch over to my screen. There we go. So Perspective Plotter, it's another one that you can find on the Blender market. And as you can see here, you basically set up your perspective lines for that geometry or that scene, and then every object in your scene will basically map onto it. You're able to work that X and Y axis in 3D according to the perspective lines of a photo. The photo that we're going to be using is got it right here. It's a street in Genoa. And it's kind of hard to tell that this is actually a photo just by the acute angle of the two streets and the wall treatment, or it looks like it's heavily edited. And while I did edit this photo, even without the edit, you could really, it kind of trips you out how the one side has like a cool stone panel and then the other one actually has this like warmer greenish tint on the other side. So I think this would be really cool for an inflection point in like a race scene or something like that, and have it inspired by the architecture in Italy. So I can recreate the street in Genoa using this plugin. I already set up a little test photo to kind of show you how this works. We have the x-axis of the 3D space running this way, and then the other y-axis running on the other perspective in this image. And so I've dropped in a cube here, more or less where it seems like the ground level would be. A little bit of tweaking could be done with the camera. So if I moved it up, I can have those lines match on the floor. And now this cube, being right above those X and Y axis lines, looks like it's on the floor. But if I move it on the Y axis, we can actually see its movement following along that hall, right? So that's kind of how the plugin works. I'm gonna go ahead and save this one as something to tinker with later. And let's go ahead and open up a new file and start from scratch. So we have our camera. We can delete our cube and our light. I'm going to take the camera and I'm going to eliminate its X rotation. Just kidding. I'm going to leave that at 90, and I'm going to eliminate its Z rotation. And then I'm going to snap it to look towards the origin, right? So in this case, if I just put it at an even 7 and 7 from the origin, and then turn it in the z-axis however many degrees, I guess not 180 but 270. What is that? 345. Negative 345. What's going on here? Have it face your origin. Negative 225. I wonder where I got the other number. There we go. For me, it's negative 225. And this is just so there's one particular setup that you could do on the X and Y axis on why you want the camera facing the axes this way. It's a little bit different than how I had set it up for that initial photo that I just showed you. But if you could imagine if the camera's here, if our point of view is from here, and this is a red line here and a green line here, that on our photo, we're going to want to have the green line follow one of these lines, and the Y, the red, follow the other line. So that's why I'm setting it up this way. So I can use these axes basically to determine that wall condition. Although that wall isn't a 90, it's like more, it's more compressed. But you know, we'll have to kind of fake it, see how it works. Another thing is I know I'm 173 centimeters, so I can put that as the height for the camera. And so now my camera's position to the 3D world is accurate. So I can just start working off of the photo. Anything I build into the scene, I can start using actual units and just have it match the perspective of the photo. I'll show you what I mean. So if I go into the camera and I activate a background image and I add an image, we're going to go ahead and open up to that photo I had just shown. And there we go. And if we look through the camera by hitting that camera icon, there we can see that photo mapped into the camera size. So the aspect ratio is a little off. So I'm just gonna go over here into output properties and I'm going to increase my Y value. I'm just gonna eyeball it for now. There we go. But you can certainly match this aspect ratio. In fact, let me just go ahead and do that. If you right click a photo and you go to properties, if you open up the properties, you go to details and then it'll tell you right here the amount of pixels that render or that photo is. In this case, photo. So 4608 on the X. And 3072. Right. So that's the right aspect ratio. I'm gonna go ahead and save that before moving forward. Okay. So with that photo now set, we'll activate the plugin. We have to be in this mode, like in this camera mode, to be able to see the plugin. So I'll go ahead and hit N and go down to perspective plotter and hit plot perspective. So now I get these red lines and green lines to match up to the axes. So I'll just go ahead and bring the X over here and put this other line just above it. I can actually, if I can trust that the brick layers are horizontal, then I can use those as my axis reference, my perspective reference. I'll have to tweak it a little bit just because that solves one axis but not a second axis, which is well, it solves them both, like to be level, but the corner is not 90, right? So but if I just follow the brick lines, I'm basically telling the plugin that this is a 90-degree corner, but it's not. Once I have these lines, you know, matching up with those brick layers, I can click and drag this dot right here and just have it so that the perspective lines that are moving in the background, I hope you can see this. If I go over onto the right hand side, I can go to the camera, back to the image, and lower its opacity. So maybe you can see what I'm talking about here. We see that grid on the ground and we see the different red and green lines. So I just want to move this white dot so that my ground plane is at my ground plane, and I can just use the moment right here where these two or this wall kind of comes out to match my ground plane. All right, so how do we know how distorted our view is right now because of that corner angle? Well, I can just bring in a cube because a cube has perfectly 90-degree angles. So if I bring in the cube here and then I move it down one line, I can see that there's a bit of distortion. Like you see it start to like shear off into the side a little bit. So both of my, I have to kind of imagine as though like these lines here are on a rotational axis. So like if there, imagine there was I forget, you can just draw on Blender. Imagine there's like a line right here and a line right here, right? And like these lines could swivel. That's kind of what I want to visually be able to do so that I kind of open up this angle into 90 degrees. So I'm going to see how well I can just kind of match this by moving this way, and then this way. this way, using cubes as my reference. So before I do so, I'm going to duplicate this cube and move it along the Y and the X, get it onto the other side. So I see there it's also leaning some. So I'll be able to, if I straighten out these cubes, right, by moving these lines, then I know I've matched my perspective much better. So let's go ahead and start moving this one and this one. Or actually, there might be an easier way to do this because the plugin itself comes with vanishing points options here. So I can actually hit a third vanishing point, which would be my Z-axis. And that way I can map this to some vertical lines that I have in the photo. This hasn't worked for me before, but I assume it's going to perfectly work in this situation because it's kind of a perfect solution to what's happening right now. And my cubes did go, one of the cubes did go flying around. But, alright, I'll try to map these Z lines. There we go. It works better if you're kind of using a corner edge of some cube to basically, like, you know, right here I'm trying to grab this window edge and this window edge because they're close together and next to each other. Although that did stretch my cube out quite a bit. Move this one back. I have to just bring in new cubes because I don't even know where these are in 3D space. Have these match back. There we go. I had to put my red lines back to where they originally were. That looks much more even. Okay. Not bad. So even though I don't have a 90-degree angle, just the perspective lines, knowing that they're flat surfaces, is working enough with the Z-axis here to actually give me both of these. And actually you could see if I move this cube perfectly along the Y-axis, it's getting further away from the wall the further it moves down the street and the closer it gets to the other wall, meaning it read that this isn't a 90-degree angle, right? Otherwise we would just see the cube running right along that wall just like it does on the X-axis. Cool. So now that we're here, we can actually start dropping in some meaningful geometry. So first off, I will increase my clipping end a bit further. And I'll drop in a cube and, like, let's say this car is in meters, what might it be? Like 1.5. So I want to use something first that I can relate, you know, size-wise to. So actually what I'll do is I'll add a mesh plane and hit Tab, E to extrude it up. And the reason why I'm using a plane and not a cube is because its origin point is going to be right under it, or right at the center of what the original plane is. Meaning if I resize the cube, right, it's going to do it from the ground plane, not from its center, like a cube would. So I'm going to go over to the right and resize this cube to be 1.5 meters tall. If you have any questions about what I'm talking about, feel free to ask. I know it's kind of it's pretty straightforward. Oops, sorry, like we're talking right into the mic. It's pretty straightforward, but it can be a little daunting or tricky to be seeing what you're seeing. I mean, at least for me, the first time I saw it, it kind of weirded me out to just kind of see like virtual objects fly around in like what looks like a photoreal space. And when you render this, the results are intense. So I'm just going to move this cube along this axis until I see it match where it's hitting the floor and what its height should be. So that I can be confident that on the ground plane, that is where the car is, although there is quite a slope upward. So I'd actually have to move the cube up a little bit to match right where the wheels touch the ground. And I can just duplicate this cube, move it down the street, and see that if I were to match this, where that car is there, I'd have to also move it slightly up and move it slightly over to the side. So we can see how these cubes are now positioned in 3D space, and it doesn't look like much, but in the photo, it looks like this, right? What that gives us is a reference point, right? So if I now drop in a wall or a plane, I can now rotate it on one axis on 90 degrees, move it along that axis, move it up, and I can build out this wall, and I can start using its dimensions or its subdivisions as a way to build out this wall. So I can go ahead and stretch it. So I can have this edge meet over here, and I need to move this one further away. So I'm just going to go and tab into edit mode and hit edge mode. And I believe I need to increase my, nope. This is something I haven't quite figured out. It sort of messes me up, which is at one point it clips through the photo, and I'm not quite sure how to change that setting unless it's right here in easy in the camera settings, viewport display, passerpout, opacity alpha of the darkened overlay in camera view. That sounds right. No, that's the darkness of the background. That sounded complicated for that. Just the darkness to the background, or opacity to the background, I suppose. Okay, so I'm not finding a way here to increase that clipping with the background image. You would think it was, I don't want to offset it, right? If I offset it, nope. It moves out of frame. Yeah. Anyway, we'll move on. I'll just build the front of the scene. So Control Shift D, escape. Sorry, not Control Shift. Select on the surface. Shift D to duplicate it. Escape to have it snap back. RZ to then rotate it. Although the way that I'm going to rotate this is actually by just grabbing that edge at the end and moving it back in and then towards the other axis. There we go. So I also need to move this edge back. That edge meet right there. Move it down. So I get this whole facade, and then I can move this line up to the top of the buildings. And same thing here for this surface. Move this upward. All right. If I add a floor now, this is where things start to get really interesting. So I'll add a floor plane right here. So I'm going to say basically that we're standing on like a perfect square that levels out. That's pretty, flattened out, and it kind of meets this corner right here. And then we have two paths. So I'll tab into that square, select this surface and hit E so that it extrudes along the x-axis. There we go. And you can actually see there, it's like it's pretty horizontal up until it meets this edge, and then it ramps up. So I can just, before it hits right there, have it overlay, and then E again in the x-axis, and now I'll just have to slope it up. Whoa. My edge got lost way over there. Move that up. There we go. Right? So I can move it up and then move it further back because it's a bit of a smoother ramp. And this is where the clipping on the photo is messing me up again. But when I get into rendered mode, or when I start hiding the photo away, we're going to start it's going to get easier to solve for that. I'm just going to have to get this road out this way as well. This one gets pretty horizontal up until it leads right there. And then it slopes up in this direction. There we go. All right, I have a base plate. We did it. What now? So I can select all of these surfaces. I can create a new material for them. And this is where it really starts to get interesting. So we got our photo, we got our perspective match, and we got our base geometries here for the scene. Now, if I get into my materials, and I just wanted to check real quick on on the health of the stream. So anyway, we got here. Now we're going to create a material that uses the photo that we're using on the background onto the geometry. So if I go into my material, I can do this easily by going into base color here and clicking on this little circle. And I can go to image texture, open, and now I gotta find my photo. Wait, just kidding. I loaded it before, so instead of hitting open, I can just hit browse image here to be linked. There we go, Genoa Street Corner. Let me know what you think of the audio levels of my voice in reference to the music. I've been trying it. I think maybe I had it too low for a while. So let me know how you think the music levels are doing in comparison with my voice now. But anywho. So we've set an image here for the background. We've now set it here as an image for this material, right? So now that if I go into material preview, I see we have that image pasted onto that wall. Real weird, right? But before I move forward, I want to actually select every other surface and then select this surface last. Hit Control L, link materials. So now that is pasted all over the photos, right? This actually looks really cool, the way it stretches the photos to the sides. But in order to get it to work properly, we'll hit Tab to go into edit mode for these surfaces. Hit A to select all these surfaces. U to unwrap. But we're going to do what's called a project from view. So basically it's going to project these images that it has as materials onto the surfaces. So it looks pretty messed up, right? That's because these surfaces only have like one or two faces. And we need way more to get this to work properly. So what we'll do here is we'll go to add in a modifier. We'll do it for this right surface first. And we're going to hit subdivision. Simple, so that it doesn't use Catmull Clark, which rounds edges. Simple just kind of creates a grid. So I can increase the levels here. And we see that that image starts to flatten out. And if I hit right here to apply and I tab into it, I could see I have some grid lines now on it. So if I hit tab and then U again to project from view, that's looking a lot better, right? So we'll do the same thing on this one. We'll do a subdivision of the surface. We'll add 4 levels to it in simple. And now we'll see if actually just projecting from view without applying it doesn't work. We want to apply that modifier. To then hit tab, A, U, smart, whoop, I had the wrong thing. Project from view. There we go. So that's going to need a little bit more tweaking. And finally, we can do it to the floor. Another modifier. And project from view. Feel free to ask any questions. By the way. The music is a nice addition, great in the background, and you still sound loud and clear. Perfect. Also, awesome. I'll keep this level consistent then. Appreciate the feedback, always. All right, we got a floor. We got some people clipping through our floor because they're there. They're in front of the floor. And we have these surfaces. Now, it doesn't look like it, right? It kind of just looks like the photo we had originally, but a little faded. But actually, if I move in 3D now, you know, it's actually pretty crazy. It's a very distorted photo, which why this looks so distorted, especially as it gets further away. Photos that are like straight on can work really well in this process as well. I'll show you. Let's look at that. No, there's no straight on surface here to the to the camera, but we can check that out on another example. What I want to first take a look at is the fact that I can now start adding edge loops to these surfaces and start to push and pull the conditions that are on these different surfaces to actually create 3D details based off of these photos. And you can get away with doing a lot of detail with very minimal effort. This is actually a method Ian Hubert uses, or a lot of people use it, but he gave a lecture for Blender explaining his creative process of doing that, like with a Coke machine. So he had like a Coke machine, and he just had, it was like a side view of it, but that gave him enough to get like the front of the Coke machine, the side panel, which he used as like all 3 other panels. And he just had this photorealistic movie quality CG Coke machine from just making a cube and slapping Coke machine photos on the sides of it. And he does this concept with like coffee shops and like all kinds of spaces. But a perspective plotter here just made everybody's process for doing that much easier. Because getting the photo right now is super easy. I can actually show how we might, if I take this wall, if I just focus on this wall now for the next 10-15 minutes, I can show how we can turn this wall fully into a usable asset with no distortion on the photo, kind of like photoshopping in Blender. But let's get right into it. So if we select these bottom edges here to make cuts, and we basically now have a cue here to set up a perspective line for the top of this window that matches right there. And we don't have to worry about this not meeting up perfectly right now, but I just want to select these surfaces that would be that opening, and I want to push them. Well, first I can do the project from view to sort of reproject that image onto them, and then I can hit E to actually like push this inward, right? I could see this better if I work in wireframe mode. All right, so I have those faces there, and I hit E and I can push it inward, and I'll use the bottom again as my reference. There we are. So it's actually like, it looks like right there. I'm trying to guide by these like white grates right here. So I think like that's the end of it. And I can model these things to go in front. That could be really quick. So if I slap over onto this side, split my view so that I can keep an eye on my 3D, you can kind of see it's just like an outline here with just some cylinders running through it. So I can quickly get away with doing that by selecting these faces. So I can map out, oops. Actually, let me just go into solid mode here. Or material preview. There we go. So I can see the faces here that are meant to be the rebars. So if I work in wireframe, sorry, not wireframe, material preview, I can shift right click onto this window, hit shift A, mesh, set a plane, and then rotate it towards camera. So in my case, on the x-axis by 90. And we bring it out in front of that wall. There we go. This is kind of like what we're looking at here. Move it down, just kind of stretch it to meet that general area. Hit tab into that surface, and then we have a tool here called Inset Faces. So that in this time I want to go to wireframe. I want to be able to see what I'm doing here, but I'm making it. I'm just gonna go by the thickness that I see on the one above it. There we go. Now that I have that set that face, delete, only faces. Now I can hit A to select that little frame, and hit extrude, and push it back, you know, as far as it needs to be for that portion. And then without exiting edit mode, I can just start already adding the cylinder that I need here. Although actually, let's not do that, because if I exit and I hit shift right click here, I can bring in the cylinder now. And I want to use an array in order to get it to fit through all the I want to use an array to be able to have equal spacing, and then I'll join it into the main frame of the piece. So I'll move it into place right now. Go to modifiers, go to array, and increase the amount of cylinders we have. There we go. Increase some spacing. I'm not trying to be 100% exact here. That's good enough. Control J. Ooh. Apply the modifier for the cylinder and then select them both. Control J, and now it's one thing. If I go into solid view, just kidding. Wireframe view, I can move it to where that window goes. Now if I go back to my camera view with that asset created, I can move it right into the window. And I'm not going to worry too much right now about getting this just right, or just specific to the photo. I'm just going to... Ooh, that's not what I want. There we go. I'm just going to array this vertically so that it fits into that space, you know, and we're kind of copying it stylistically. So if I look at it in rendered view, and bring it forward, doesn't look like much, right? I mean, it still looks distorted, it still looks pasted and whatnot. But if I reproject now onto the model and I switch over from, well, I can even stay in EV, but if I bring in a light into the scene and I increase its intensity, you can start to see that, you know, there's some like visual trickery happening again, right? Like this is obviously a photo, but this light can now travel through the space and relight the space. So all these details you see there, like as the light passes the window, all these surface details that we start creating are just going to make these moments a lot more accurate to the lighting in the scene. And we're basically using the assets from this photo over and over to, you know, recreate it. I can actually add that texture to this piece, right? The photo texture. Looks weird, but if I hit Tab A, U, project from view, it should be catching, if not the great material, some of the great material, or that rebar situation. And if I tab over here into UV editing, right? In UV editing, whatever surfaces you have selected here on the right hand side, you can kind of tweak over here. So I could, for example, just kind of select all these faces for this rebar, and then as long as in 2D over here, I match it to the rebar. There we go. I'm basically now using that photo as texture, and you can take this, you know, as far as you want to be able to use all these photos as actual geometry for your 3D scene. Welcome new viewers. For those watching live, if you're not scrolling back to the beginning, I'm using photos to basically recreate a scene here in 3D using perspective plotter. And now we're getting into the real nitty-gritty of, once you have your base plate and you have these objects that you want to have, you know, match the 3D scene that you're creating, because you know, to get this level of detail out of the photo, it would be inefficient to be pushing and pulling out of the photo. So you start creating new geometry such as this to be able to bring in some of that detail. And basically by mapping these 2D surfaces onto these moments here that we can catch in the photo and use as textures, essentially. I'm going to do one more, just this one here, before we see how this comes out. And again, there's a little bit of wonkiness to deal with, but... Ooh, I got one more surface I gotta fix, which would be, or a few more surfaces, which would be everything front facing just needs to be white because it's catching a lot of photo and that's adding a lot of detail to the edge that isn't looking great. So we'll hit normal. What I did there is I selected one surface, hit Shift G to select, you know, other ones that have those same qualities, and I can hit on normal and it selects all the other faces that are looking that way. So now I can move this here and just have these corners fit into the edges of the frame. Feel free to ask any questions at any point in time, Blender related or otherwise. Accepting anything from you guys in the chat, always. That's what the live sessions are for. I can later cut this up into anything. Okay. So if I go back into layout, I see there how that has been able to paste over the grates. And as we can see again from the camera's perspective, that really adds that little touch of, you know, flexibility to the scene by having those elements made in 3D. So, and this could be done with all these little details. So I can start doing loop cuts and start bringing out these different pieces. In these moments, it would really help if you made sure your verticals are vertical in your photo. I'm not so sure I'm having some issue here, or is it the way that I set up the plugin? This is a pretty challenging photo to be working with, honestly. But anywho, I can now select this and extrude it forward just a tiny bit. And nothing in the real world is perfect, is it? So I'd have to move this down a bit slightly. Hit A, U, project from view. And just kind of start moving things around here. Should have probably made this piece a standalone piece built up on top of the surface, because now I'm kind of caught here with this weird extrusion. There we go. Now I think I can just do this one face. You project from view. All right, now how do we deal with this entire wall, right? So I'd want to be able to more or less use those same cells that I used earlier and start pushing them in the same amount. So I'm just going to use the bottom as my reference again for where all these openings go. There we go. Add a horizontal line here for their tops, so they look like they shift down a little bit as they move downhill. And with that, always using the bottom as the reference. Whatever I start using as a reference, you know, could be consistent with that. And since I started using the bottom corner of this wall to set my origin for the whole perspective, then, you know, essentially the location of all of these are referent to their bottom position. So this skew here is what I'm trying to correct for. And we'll do this top row along with the bottom row. I can also use C to kind of paint in my selection. Sometimes could work easier. And if you hold shift, you can eliminate from it. Yes, I do want that row as well. Trying to not select anything wrong here. Ooh, I need to add a loop cut there for that, so I'll do that one later. Just push these in for now. Grab those grates that I had from earlier and duplicate them into those openings in the model. Now this is where we have to switch back into solid view so we can see what we're doing. And just scale that to fit it. There we go. Playing it fast and loose here. Cool. Now that we have all those set up, we go back to rendered view. Now we'll select all of these faces. I don't know about all of them. We definitely want to do the ones that are more distorted. So we'll work with this side panel here. I'm going to go ahead and go into my flat view by hitting over here on the compass. If I hit C and I start selecting, I start selecting all these flat faces that have been pushed in that have all these grates on them. Oh, didn't do that one. I can now hit UV unwrap, and if I go to UV editing now for this one, they're all going to be just their normal surfaces here. So what I want to do with those is actually just have them match on top of this opening here, so I can use that same opening throughout in every single instance, right? In every single moment. So I think there's actually a better way for me to do this one. If I do just unwrap, they all go over to the side. There was one where they would start to overlap in the center. And perhaps that might be another plugin here called 2 square grid or 2 grid by shape. Anywho, I'm pretty sure there's a better way to have all these stack up on top. I think it might have to be that they are separate objects, because we have some surfaces here that are, we have some surfaces here that are together, right? So we might have to do one by one. Ooh, Shift D. So when you have that selection brush on with C, you can scroll in order to change the size of it. There we go. So with that column, I can now know I can resize it down and just kind of have it fit into this darker area. And same thing with all the others. But I'll just do it with these two for now. Get the point across, and then I'll do it to the rest of the wall, which is what really needs it. Right. So now we have those kind of pasted into there. What happened there? I'll just move on to the main wall. So if I select all these parts here that have wall on them, or I just want to make all of this just wall, we get away from the photo a little bit. I can now do U, unwrap, and similar to before, I go to the UV editing. And I want to start just moving these faces over to meet this brick here. actually. If I go to my view here, if I do project from view, there we go. I can just move them closer here to this area where it's a bit cleaner. I can start using this whole group of faces together to kind of match that piece right there. So it starts to look a bit more distorted, but a bit more front facing from that side. So perhaps if I stretch it. Yep. There's a bit of tweaking to do here. So we can select vertex mode, select all these faces here, and go into proportional editing so that I can now put all these points together. We see here that's starting to make a bit more sense. I maybe don't want the smooth proportional editing. I want linear proportional editing, so it doesn't introduce any strange curves. But essentially, by pulling bits off of the photo, and you could even take this a step further by taking the photo into Photoshop and then like flattening out different parts of the photo and tweaking them around so that that looks a bit better from a different perspective. But from this initial perspective, if we start to look at what this starts to look like in a real rendered view, if we do, let's say, cycles, and we switch to GPU, and rather than just have this one little light here, we bring in an HDRI. So once again, we can go into Blender Kit, HDRs, and let's see if I search Italy, if I can get an Italy sky. Something similar to what we're seeing here. So that's nighttime. That's an alley. That's pretty accurate. We're in an alley. Okay. So you could see an alley way out in the background past the camera, but we're not concerned with that. We can go into our camera settings over here and down where we discovered earlier. We can turn off everything that's outside of our view right now. And I'm going to actually turn up the photo all the way in opacity. There we go. So we can see what our lighting is doing to our scene. So again, now we can introduce anything into this scene. If I move this cube into the center, I can also move it, you know, down the street that way. And if I introduce any other lights, like let's say I make this whole thing, since we're going through a bunch of plugins, shout out to Ducky 3D, who's got this great real-time materials kit. And I can go into Hex UV, because I know there's some here that emit light. So I can throw that onto there, make it much, much brighter, and much more detailed with I'll add some subdivisions again. Whenever something doesn't work, just add subdivisions, and then there's a cube projection here. There we go. So yeah, now we have a 3D scene that's made by this photo, but we can start introducing other elements here that can relight it, and painting out people, painting out cars, you know, as much as you can get on just empty surfaces of building, the better. And a way to take this a step further, if you're working with a video, you can just take, and the camera's stationary, you could take one of these frames and basically build out your 3D scene, and you can render out your 3D objects now as though they are in the scene and overlay that onto a video because you've been able to build off of a backplate. This is really useful for architecture too, because let's say that, well, I mean, you could kind of come up with concepts really quickly. If you can just take a photo of something and then you quickly can map this out, and you can come up with, I don't know, we select all these, and then we add assign a new material slot to that, and we can add a different brick. Going back to Ducky's plugin, where do you have your bricks? Or tiles? Yeah, tiles. Let's say we wanted to change all that to tiles. You just said add material, assign, and now that part of the wall's tile. We can do this, you know, we have full-on control over what's going on in this scene. Yeah. So basically, it would take within an hour, kind of explained how to set up the scene, you know, set up a base plate. The base plate wasn't bad. If you're wondering what that looks like, this is it. This is the base plate. It was really just the ground floor, these two walls, right, that we started off as a base plate, and I chose to use the windows, right, to start detailing those. So again, it's a mess when you step out of the camera view, right? There's a lot more work to do. If you use a less distorted photo or more flat on photo, you know, you might be able to get a bit more usability out of it. But yeah, that's it for today's video. I'm going to take any questions or any comments. I see that most of you dropped out, as my tone seemed to suggest I was wrapping it up. So yeah, this is a really, really useful process. It does take quite a bit of tinkering if you want to start using this outside of just the camera view. If you want to start using this for an actual scene, you can see that I've started to work this out, but it takes a little bit of tweaking to really get it to be to a usable state. If you're just going to stick to the camera view, then this is incredibly useful here, right? I could do this type of object stretched out like this. I don't know. Just kind of playing around here now, trying to get this to something that's proving the point. Anyhow, there's so many ways that you could take this on. I could also add, you know, this is always what my go-to should be, is to add a UV sphere and just place it on the ground plane. There we go. That's it, just 3 spheres always. The matte sphere, the reflective sphere, and the metallic sphere. I'm going to turn on the denoiser, which I don't know why I waited so long to do that. There we go. Looks a bit dreamy. There's our metallic sphere, looking like a disco ball. Here's our matte sphere with a bit more roughness and just a bit of sheen. And then here's our glossy sphere with a little bit of clear coat, very little roughness, and also more sheen. Nice. That's pretty cool. Thank you, EM. Thanks for tuning in, always. Thanks for commenting, giving me feedback on the audio. Always appreciate that. Making sure everything's working correctly. Wow. Yeah, it's kind of cool when you start to see, also with reflections, how you can start to, I'm gonna add subdivisions to this one and then zoom in so you can see that. You know, it's like now this this sphere is actually floating within the photo. It looks so well perfectly placed there because it's catching all those reflections from the photo onto the sphere itself. Oh, you know, it'd be an interesting one to add. Not one of these, but over here off to the side. I've never done this one before, but I saw someone do it. It's a glass ball, which I think we would do with transmission. Oh, yeah, that's it. That one has the same material though as the other one. I just want to change one of them. So we increase transmission, and now we have a glass sphere. In case we didn't have enough spheres to test the scene with. Now I want to see the glass sphere up here with the metal sphere. And adding in some subdivisions to the metal one. There we go. So this, you know, it's just blowing my mind how that just works in that one corner. You know, we step away and this is an absolute mess. And then we just go back to the camera view and it's just so much closer to, you know, you can actually imagine. Actually, if we hit render, let's see what this looks like. And we'll call it there. And this is all that's going on in the scene, right? And yet we're getting some pretty dang photorealistic results. So we'll do render image. And I didn't build out enough of the scene, but if you have any questions as I close out, thanks for watching. This was an interesting process for me to test out. It's very promising in order to build worlds really quickly and just start using them with different characters or different vehicles that I create for this this project. Yeah, I think just gathering a whole bunch of photography from this Italy trip and mapping out certain areas to build out and really pick and choose what it is that I'm going to take from each photo to build as an asset, unless I plan to use the full photo as a scene, like that camera view itself, because that's less work. But if I have like a straight on view of a building and I can create that side of the building, and then I can just modify it slightly to create other sides of that one building, I now have a full block photorealistic building that I can use in other situations or continue to use. Performance, that's where I'm going. Can't believe I always go with the defaults at first and it makes no sense. Here we go. Render image. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. I gotta start telling people, if you subscribe, also hit the notification bell so you know when I start streaming. Consistently Tuesdays and Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Other nights you'll catch me in that time frame. Oh, there's so much more I could have gotten into. You guys asked this renders. Take a look at. Oh, that's fine. We'll do another session on that. Because there's this really cool plugin by this guy. I gotta track it down though. But basically, it takes a photo and it automatically produces from that your different maps. So the different rough areas, the different reflective areas and glossy areas, your displacement. So like all these little little grid texture, and then the irregularity of these other ones, and the pebble kind of lakeness that's just like built into the photo. It just turns it into visual data that can actually like push and pull the surface of the mesh, which just, you know, takes it to a whole other level with that. I might just do that for my own amusement and in order to prepare for maybe a video tomorrow. That would be a nice short and sweet one for tomorrow. I thought this would go faster. I guess because the photo is a really high quality photo from a camera. It is like a 4K. It's bigger than a 4K photo, and I'm using it several times. That might be jotting down some speed here. So yeah, I mean, it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. If we look here, like I'd have to build out this pipe. or whatever that is. And you know, have it actually like be its own object, so that the image of that object isn't like slapping on the ground and then distorting up onto the wall. Not sure if this diagonal pattern is me forgetting to reproject the texture, or there's some push and pull in the photo there to mess with. But yeah, like, even though you know that those spheres aren't actually there, it's interesting to see them catch the light of the situation, catch the light of the environment around it, and also cast shadows on its environment. Here we go. This is what I wanted to see, is the glass and the metal ball. Man, I remember before we had the denoise function. So all this visual stuff here is, right, like all this grain, what we call noise, which is the same thing in cameras, right? Like your sensor doesn't get enough light, or in this case, we didn't do enough artificial light bounces in CG, that you get noise. And now it's been a while that there is an AI that just kind of cleans up at the end all this visual noise and makes it much clearer. I remember we had to like save the render like this, like 10-14 years ago, save the render like this, take it into Photoshop and use the denoise functions there, or into Lightroom and use the denoise functions in like photo editing apps to get rid of that noise. That's cool. It looks like that guy's reacting to the disco ball. Anywho, you get it. For the thumbnail, for the final image that I push out, I'll have to remember to maintain my subdivisions high enough on these spheres here. Yeah, just kind of wanted to, you know what, if I zoom in like this, now the I can cut the video when that's done. And yeah, take any questions if you want to ask any. I thought there was an announcement I wanted to make. I mean, mainly moving forward, I will be posting out that I'm going to be letting people know on Instagram and on Twitter and on Facebook when I'm going live. So it's still just mainly going to be YouTube. Although I've been going live on YouTube and Twitter at the same time. I just don't really have an audience in Twitter. It's just something I'm starting to get into. So anyways, for outside of the hours in which I stream, which are consistently, which are Tuesday and Wednesday at 8 p.m., to know when I'm streaming, or even to get a reminder when that's going down, you can follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram, or follow me on Facebook. And it's The Visual Mode anywhere you go, same as this channel. All right, with that, I thank you. Have a great night. We'll see you again tomorrow for the next one, and continue to build off of these this Italian world. All right.